Thank you, Sasha. We are here in London, but I have to admit, I was one of the students enticed by the 24-hour nightlife in Groningen. And I actually spent a year living there and studying, so I can vouch that it's definitely one of the happiest places in the world. But I left actually inspired and absolutely motivated to have a career in energy. So basically because of how they did things there, they made it so easy. I'm sure it isn't that easy, but they made it seem like it was. My dissertation was actually on the difference in policy and legislation in the UK and the Netherlands, trying to understand why they were able to do things in the Netherlands that we just couldn't make work in the UK. So very much agree with the comment that infrastructure in the UK is very much a political issue. I think it will continue to be. But back to London, where we are today. Paula, Kirk, you've already heard a little bit about Arup. I'm a director in our energy and climate change team, so probably more of a focus on the energy. You all know what decentralized energy is. Again, we know that there's very much a move towards this rather than centralized energy sources in the UK. I'm not going to talk too much about fuel sources today, but the one thing I want to just highlight here is about the integration. So looking at secondary heat sources, renewable energy, and different forms in terms of combined heat and power. The integration is really what's central and what's key to all of this. And looking at multiple source district heating networks. We have ongoing discussions about heat in the UK. Is it going to be electrified? If it is, when will that happen? And what is our transition to get to there? We also understand we need to reduce energy, we need to retrofit. I've heard the statistics that 80% of the buildings that exist today will still be around in 2050. So how are we actually going to heat those buildings? And what do we do in terms of district heating systems that are there already? How can we make sure that they don't become stranded assets? And I think one of the key solutions to that is very much about integrating the systems together and just making them a little bit smarter. So just draw your attention to the bottom, you can see storage, and you can see renewable energy, and you can see the heat pumps. And really what overlays all of this to make it smarter is the microgrid, and actually taking the idea of power and electricity microgrids and adapting that for heat systems as well. In terms of how that actually is monitored and controlled, I think it's essential to just highlight that that needs to be a two-way system. Whilst we can all have heat meters, they're fantastic, they help us potentially reduce demand, but we need to think about suppliers, we need to think about industry, and we need to think about distribution systems and how they're being smart as well. So for a completely integrated system, we need to look at heating, electricity, energy reduction, but as well as looking at the power generation, energy storage down on the left is going to be crucial. Distributed energy management, you can see all across the bottom, that's an essential part of a smart energy system. And user applications. I think this is something that's not talked about enough, but is again critical to smart energy rollout, is understanding industry, commercial buildings, residential, all of the different users of energy, and how do we make sure that we're actually fully integrating and making a smart distribution grid across the whole of the UK. In terms of why we're doing all of this, now again I'm sure you're all incredibly familiar with the energy trilemma. Secure and resilient supply, making sure that it's low carbon and clean and affordable. And everybody goes into this with a different perspective. They often start in one place, and then the key is actually trying to make sure that you consider all three to come up with the smartest solution. When we talk about district heating in the UK, it's often led by local authorities, municipalities and cities. And I guess the one thing I haven't, well, I'll come on to later about cities, carbon reduction and reducing fuel poverty. They've traditionally been the main drivers for local authorities and cities in the UK to look at district heating. One thing we're seeing more and more is energy security. And the image you can see there in the bottom left is New York. Again, a little bit far removed from London, but this was after Sandy. And whether or not you think that we're going to have changes in climate in the UK, when Sandy happened in New York, they had a complete blackout. The only lights you can see in Manhattan are where there was a district heating, a community energy system. distributed energy, and they were able to actually power themselves for 2 days when the rest of New York was at a standstill. So energy security, building in resilience, I think is going to be increasingly more important as we move forward. On the point of cities, we've talked a little bit already. We've heard from Simon about leadership. The image on the left, that's the 450 mayors who were at COP21 in Paris in December last year. You'll probably recognize Mayor Hidalgo from Paris at the bottom there with Mike Bloomberg. He's actually the UN Special Envoy in Cities and Climate Change, and his mantra is very much, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think that that's something that applies very well to smart energy and in terms of how we actually can manage a smarter energy distribution for the whole of the UK. We do need to be able to understand it, measure it, to be able to take effective and decisive management action of that. And I guess Arup actually have a strong partnership. We're in a 3-year research partnership with the C40, and we've been working across a number of cities in terms of understanding the different solutions that they've taken, London being one of them. Very much think that that leadership is essential to make things happen. In the UK nationally, we know that there is issues around grid supply. Winter capacity was at the lowest in a decade last year. So back to London. In terms of city leadership and what's happening in London, talking briefly just about heat networks. Heat networks essentially are hot water being piped through to heat buildings. Not the most exciting thing in the world. On the right is a heat pipe. Just to draw your attention to the van on the top left, for those of you with excellent eyesight, you'll see solar PV, waste to energy, and micro-renewables. So those active in the industry are already looking at integrated systems for district heating. And I think, again, if district heating is going to work, it needs to be smarter, it needs to be multi-source, and it needs to be fully integrated. So in London, strong leadership, strong energy policy. Again, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the targets that exist. 25% decentralised energy, 35% below national building standards, and they've already set a price for carbon reduction. A key element of achieving this is stakeholder multi-engagement. And I think this is, again, essential to the integration element. This looks a little bit like an obituary, I realised when I saw it. And I have to say that the Decentralised Energy for London programme has not died a death. It very much will live on. And is actually being renamed as Energy for Londoners, for those of you who saw the new Mayor's manifesto. And this programme is out for tender at the minute. So there's European funding secured, I've been told, for another 3 years. And this project will continue to go ahead. So what does the project do? There is a requirement for new buildings to connect to district heating. How does anybody know where they are? As I've said, they're pipes under the ground. They're not the most exciting thing in the world. I'm not sure whether Tom would have this an application, but what we've done is we've built a GIS map to identify where all of the opportunities are for district heating, which you can see on there are the purple blobs, and the small red, again, which those of you can see with good eyesight, are where the potential district heating networks are currently being planned. So this, when you go online, this is the londonheatmap.org, is actually quite a detailed GIS map of all of the different heat sources and networks that already exist in London. And this is used by all developers, utility companies, anyone looking to roll out district heating. So again, one element of SMART is making sure that that data is easily accessible to those people who need it. And this map, we currently manage this on behalf of the Mayor, and we update this regularly. One other thing in terms of integrated and being smarter is master planning. And I think it's important not to forget that for any of these schemes to be effective, they do need to be planned quite thoroughly. And that's from the strategic city scale level right down to district level. And essentially, and something that I think is being a little bit overlooked by current UK thinking, is the adding of the smart grids and the microgrids onto the end of all of these systems. I think that's absolutely essential for us to be able to future-proof. We're building and designing for the future today, so we really need to be thinking and integrating that now. In terms of the actual program, the Mayor's Decentralised Energy Programme, so ARP have run this, provided the technical, commercial and financial advisory support to the Mayor's office. 3 million scheme, I'll skip one. We've actually provided a range of support, so from feasibility, modelling, technical advice, contractual advice, right through to owner's engineer of making sure the schemes are actually being installed properly. The cities in terms of London, so the boroughs have really taken a strong lead forward, and there's a number of London boroughs have actually set themselves up as energy service companies. And I think this is critical in terms of how they go forward as well. So you see that happening in Camden, Islington and other local authorities. They have to deal with a range of complex issues in terms of who can deliver that heat network. And I think, again, in terms of integration, it's important to understand how all of these individuals and stakeholders actually come together, and how SMART, if SMART is going to have a prominent role in any one of these stakeholders, then they need to be able to talk to each other. Otherwise, we're not really going to be as smart as we'd like. So again, just covering those range of options that's essential to consider. So there's a number of different examples. The Camden study I've already talked about. The Olympic Park, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is powered by district heating, and Vauxhall Nine Elms and Battersea area. This has been particularly interesting in terms of the US Embassy, who are one of the major heat providers there. And the year and a half of discussions that it took for all of those stakeholders to actually jointly procure a scheme, again, talks about the need for integration and to be able to actually communicate with each other. Just want to finish with, I guess, just maybe a side against that district heating clearly isn't the right solution everywhere. So rather than just picking an idea and rolling it out across the country, we need to think where it doesn't work. Now, we looked at Waltham Forest, and rather than having a district heating network across the whole borough, what we identified was that there were pockets where it was incredibly economically and beneficial to do it, technically suitable, but there are other areas where it wasn't. So I guess it's just to raise that point that it doesn't work everywhere. We need to be, again, clever and smarter about where we use the systems. So, as I said, the project hasn't actually come to a close. It's just renaming and relaunching, but it has achieved 130 million of capital investment to date, with another 420 million in the pipeline. So that's very much what the next 3 years will focus on delivering. And it has, we think, influenced the National Heat Network Delivery Unit, which has a £320 million budget to roll that out over the next couple of years. So to conclude, role of energy in cities and the transition. At the risk of giving Manchester a little bit too much airtime, just wanted to also mention a DIMMER project that is very much looking, it's another EU-funded project, so District Information Modelling and Management for Energy Reduction. This is, again, with a number of different partners, EU-funded, which ARP is involved in, which is using sensors to gather data for energy use in districts and cities. So very much, again, about how do we take on-the-ground real data and feed it back to industry, to utility, and to those who are actually managing the distribution energy networks. So there's more information will be released on that later this year, so please do keep an eye out for it. This is another piece of work to be announced later this year, again, just looking at low-carbon heat carriers and the idea of integrated systems. So again, more to follow later this year. But for now, thank you very much.